The basement smelled faintly of damp stone and candle wax, a place where voices once hushed in prayer, now gathered in unease. Jonathan Roumie stood at the center, his shoulders bent slightly forward, his face pale with exhaustion, but not defeat. He was not here to perform, not here to entertain. He was here because something pressed against his spirit so heavily it could not be contained. The metal folding chairs creaked as people shifted, their eyes darting between each other, unsure of what was about to unfold. A Puerto Rican mother clutched her child closer. An elderly black man leaned on his cane, lips moving in silent prayer. Teenagers in hoodies, pretending disinterest, kept their phones tilted just enough to record but not enough to look away. When Jonathan finally spoke, his voice carried no theatrics, no performance, only raw, trembling truth. Jesus is coming. The words did not echo. They landed. They sat heavy on the hearts of those gathered, spreading like invisible fire. Silence gripped the room, the kind of silence that made breathing feel like interruption. Among them, at the back of the room, Pastor Harlan Briggs adjusted his gold cufflinks. He did not belong in this basement. His world was marble stages, polished, pulpits, spotlighted sermons broadcast nationwide. Yet here he was, curiosity and contempt mingling across his well-fed face. He had heard whispers about Roumie, the actor turned unlikely messenger, and came expecting spectacle. Instead, he found himself staring at a man who shook as though carrying something greater than his body could bear. Briggs leaned to his associate and muttered with a chuckle. He still thinks he's on a movie set, just an actor playing holy. His words slithered into the quiet, though only those nearest caught them. Jonathan's eyes, hollow with sleeplessness, yet burning with conviction, slowly turned toward Briggs. For a long moment no one breathed. The fluorescent light above buzzed as though the air itself protested the mockery. Jonathan's voice, softer now, carried sharper than any shout. "You don't mock me, Pastor. You mock the one who sent me." A murmur rippled through the crowd, mothers pulling their children closer, elders straightening their backs as though scripture itself had been spoken into the walls. Briggs smirked, his jaw tightening, his confidence unbroken, but his amusement faltering. He sat back, arms crossed, the practiced image of a man unthreatened, yet the room felt tilted, as if Jonathan's words had shifted the ground under everyone's feet. The narration lingers on Jonathan's trembling hands, his Bible clutched like it might slip away if he loosened his grip. He looked less like a preacher and more like a man caught between heaven and earth, eyes carrying weight far older than himself. The immigrant families saw in him the same burden they carried every day, disbelief in systems that never heard their cries, hope that whispered in the dark when no one else listened. The black elders recognized something in his tone, the familiar ring of a truth that white pulpits often sanitized, and the youth, skeptical yet restless, could not dismiss the raw sincerity before them. Briggs, however, felt no stirring. His empire was built on spectacle, on prosperity tied to skin color and donation tiers, on the belief that his voice carried more authority than the scriptures themselves. To him, Jonathan was an intruder in the pulpit of influence. But he would not confront him here, not in a damp basement among folding chairs and flickering bulbs. Briggs smiled, the kind of smile that preceded calculation. He already knew where he would strike, how he would dismantle this trembling actor with words polished by years of stagecraft. Jonathan felt the weight of that smile and pressed on, his voice breaking. "You think this is my message? No. This was given, and it cannot be taken back." His gaze swept the room, finding the eyes of the weary, the fearful, the forgotten. "This is not a warning for the rich, not a sermon for the powerful. This is for you. The ones they said don't matter." A low gasp escaped someone in the back. A child's small amen broke through. Briggs shifted, annoyed. He would not let this actor's whisper outshine his thunder. Yet as Jonathan's final words settled into the air, the atmosphere tightened. The children leaned forward. The elders nodded slowly, knowingly. Even the teenagers dropped their phones into their laps, caught in a current they couldn't scroll past. Briggs's smile grew thinner, his mind sharpening its knives. He would make his move soon, and he would make it public. But for now, he sat in silence, letting Jonathan's trembling truth hang suspended in the stale basement air. Jonathan, meanwhile, closed his eyes for a moment, almost crumbling under the unseen weight he bore. When he opened them again, he looked not at Briggs, not at the crowd, but straight ahead, as though into something eternal. The room did not stir. The words he had spoken, quiet as they were, had rooted themselves. Everyone could feel it. Briggs leaned forward, whispering under his breath, "We'll see about that." And in that hushed challenge, as Jonathan lowered his head in prayer, the seed of a storm was planted. Briggs left that basement that night with a polished smile but a brewing storm behind his eyes, determined to reassert his dominance in the world that had crowned him untouchable. The story of Jonathan's trembling declaration, however, did not stay confined to the basement walls. Within hours, shaky phone recordings of his words, "Jesus is coming," were stitched into countless feeds, carrying with them the raw urgency that unsettled even casual scrollers. Unlike the theatrical sermons Briggs staged, Jonathan's frail tone had a quality that gripped people unexpectedly, as though the man were speaking on borrowed time. The narration moves backward, weaving into Briggs' empire of polished marble, halls and wide glass stages where sermons about purity were coded warnings against outsiders. In one memory, a young Latino family stood at the mega-church entrance, hopeful for a place to worship, only to be met with Briggs' usher, whispering an order to send them away. Briggs himself appeared moments later, shaking his head. "We're not equipped for your kind of issues," he said smoothly, guiding them out with a smile that looked merciful but cut like exile. The father's hand tightened around his daughter's wrist as they walked away, her small voice asking, "Why can't we go in?" Another flashback unfolds in the church's youth ministry, where black teenagers once gathered, restless but searching. Briggs labeled them troublemakers, ordering his staff to focus on recruiting families that matched the image of success. Those words spread through hushed staff meetings. Success meant white, suburban, wealthy. Dissenters fell silent, some resigning, others staying to protect what little good they thought they could salvage. City officials, wooed by Briggs's donations and public influence, looked the other way when complaints surfaced. He was too valuable, too golden in appearance to be held accountable. His empire thrived because the faithful mistook marble and gold-plated pulpits for divine blessing, forgetting that exploitation could wear a smile. But Jonathan's warning, unexpected, unpolished, trembling yet unwavering, slipped through the cracks Briggs had spent decades sealing. The live stream of his words, shared in shaky pixels and muffled audio, spread faster than any polished broadcast Briggs had ever delivered. People who would never sit in his pews watched, replayed, and whispered, "Something's different about him." A young black reporter in a newsroom leaned close to her colleague as the video played, her eyes fixed on Jonathan's breaking voice. "This isn't theater," she whispered. "Look at his face. Something's different." Her words were carried into the newsroom like an ember, unsettling those accustomed to cynicism. Meanwhile, Briggs' staff gathered in his sprawling office, where leather chairs gleamed under soft light and walls displayed photographs of him, shaking hands with governors and mayors. His media director, nervous, muttered, "The actor's video is trending. We should respond." Briggs adjusted his tie, dismissing the urgency with a wave. "We'll paint him delusional. Remind them he's not a prophet, just a man pretending." His words dripped with control, but his fingers drummed on the desk, an involuntary betrayal of unease. The team began their campaign. Op-eds, interviews, staged comments calling Jonathan unstable and obsessed with doomsday. But for the first time, the polish didn't stick. One by one, voices long silenced began surfacing in brief but cutting testimonies. A Latina mother, her face weary from years of quiet dismissal, appeared in a handheld recording outside her apartment. Her words were simple, almost reluctant. "When I went to his church, Pastor Briggs told me, 'Your people bring problems, not faith.' I left crying. I never told anyone. But now, I think I should." The video was raw, shaky, nothing like Briggs's professional productions, yet it pierced deeper than any of his polished defenses. A former deacon, gray now and stooped with regret, spoke quietly on camera. His hand trembled as he clutched the edge of a table. "We knew," he admitted. "We knew, but we stayed silent. We told ourselves we couldn't fight him. We told ourselves it was for the greater good. But we let him trample people." His voice cracked, and his confession spread, shared more widely than he imagined, each replay tightening the noose around Briggs' narrative. Narration lingers on the tilt of the world, how Jonathan's fragile stream unsettled a fortress of lies, built over decades. Briggs's empire, which once thrived on spectacle and coded dominance, now faced the quiet revolt of testimonies and whispered truths. These voices were not loud, not staged, not choreographed. They were hesitant, halting, whispered in kitchens and back porches, but together they carried more power than the marble halls Briggs had built. Against this rising tide, Jonathan remained calm, his silence between words more powerful than Briggs's sermons. He did not argue, did not retaliate. His very restraint became a weapon, his trembling sincerity a mirror that reflected every hidden fracture in Briggs's empire. And as the testimonies multiplied, as more began whispering, "This isn't theater," the fortress that seemed unshakable began to tremble beneath the weight of truth. Briggs's cold smile from that basement meeting had not faded. But what followed unsettled even him. The video of Jonathan's trembling words leaked onto the internet, not through polished channels, but through grainy recordings that carried the weight of authenticity. Unlike Briggs' sermons with their choreographed lights and sound, Jonathan's warning arrived unfiltered, raw, and impossible to dismiss. People who had never heard his name before now found themselves replaying the clip, staring at the man's haunted eyes, whispering to themselves about the urgency in his tone. Narration stretches into Briggs's past, peeling back layers of his carefully built empire. He had long mastered the art of coded racism, preaching about protecting values and guarding purity, phrases that cloaked exclusion in scripture. One flashback reveals ushers at the megachurch, acting on Briggs' orders, gently steering a Latino family away from the sanctuary doors with lines rehearsed to sound pastoral. Briggs himself stood in the lobby, greeting select families with practiced warmth, while the turned-away father carried his daughter down the steps, her small voice asking, "Why can't we go inside?" Another flashback shows Briggs dismissing black teenagers who lingered after a youth service, his voice calm but firm as he told a staffer, "They're distractions, not disciples. Focus on the families who matter." His empire grew with every act of erasure, and city officials, cushioned by his donations and appearances at civic galas, chose blindness over accountability. Jonathan's livestream tore through that silence, echoing with the urgency found in the uploaded prophetic accounts of warnings that time is ending. It became impossible to treat as mere performance, especially when his voice cracked under the weight of conviction. A young black reporter, watching the stream in a dim newsroom corner, leaned to her colleague and whispered, "This isn't theater. Look at his face. Something's different." Her words cut against years of cynicism, and others in the newsroom turned their eyes from muted televisions to the trembling man on screen. Meanwhile, Briggs convened his staff in his marble-walled office. His media advisor wrung her hands nervously. "He's trending everywhere. We should get ahead of this." Briggs waved a dismissive hand, pouring himself another drink. "He's an actor. Actors pretend. Remind them of that. He's delusional, desperate for relevance." Yet his finger tapped against the glass rim, betraying a rhythm of unease. The smear campaign rolled out within hours. Op-eds mocking Jonathan as unstable, paid commentators ridiculing his warning as a publicity stunt, anonymous accounts labeling him a failed celebrity trying to play prophet. But the harder they pushed, the less convincing it sounded. The public, used to Briggs' shine, found Jonathan's frailty strangely believable. Then the testimonies began surfacing, not in orchestrated waves, but in hesitant, halting bursts. A Latina mother uploaded a video from her kitchen table, her child drawing quietly in the background. "When I went to Pastor Briggs' church," she said softly, "he told me, 'Your people bring problems, not faith.'" I never forgot those words. They cut me, and I left. The rawness of her story spread quickly, because it was not polished. It was real. Soon after, a former deacon appeared on a shaky handheld recording. His face carried lines of regret, his voice shaking with confession. We knew, but we stayed silent. We told ourselves we couldn't fight him, that we had to protect the church image, but we let him trample people. His eyes watered as he admitted the complicity of silence, and viewers who once admired Briggs felt their faith fracture. Narration emphasizes how these scattered voices, fragile as they seemed, began tipping the balance. Briggs's fortress of marble and gold trembled against the steady hum of quiet truths, long suppressed. Jonathan, meanwhile, did not argue, did not fight back against the slanders. He sat quietly in interviews, his answers brief, his silences longer than his words. That restraint, so different from Briggs's booming defenses, became its own kind of sermon. His calmness painted Briggs's theatrics in garish light, each over-rehearsed denial sounding more desperate by contrast. The world began tilting as narration captures the shift, one whispered testimony here, another quiet admission there, together forming a tide that no empire of stage lights could stop. Briggs' confidence began to erode, not through shouts, but through whispers. His fortress of lies cracked not under fury, but under the unbearable weight of truth spoken in voices that had once been ignored. And at the center of it all, Jonathan remained steady, his trembling sincerity an anchor pulling hidden wounds into the light. The storm that Jonathan never tried to summon left ruins not in fire or shouting, but in silence that spread wider than any broadcast Pastor Briggs had ever orchestrated. In the weeks that followed, the marble empire that once gleamed with cameras and applause hollowed out. Donations that used to flow like a river dried to a trickle. Sponsors quietly stepped away, issuing vague press releases about restructuring, while cutting ties with the man whose face had once been plastered across billboards. The grand sanctuary that seated thousands shrank to a scattering of restless attendees, each pew more empty than the last. Briggs returned to his mansion each night, walking halls that echoed with absence. Lights stayed off in rooms once staged, for fundraisers, curtains drawn across windows that no one cared to look through anymore. Narration lingers on the image of him late at night, slouched in front of a glowing screen, scrolling through old broadcasts where his voice once roared. With certainty, he watched himself declare blessings, watched the cheers of a crowd that no longer returned his calls, his finger trembling on the pause button. When his phone vibrated with one final attempt to reach his daughter, the silence on the other end cut deeper than any accusation. She refused to answer, the void between father and child heavier than the silence between him and his deserted congregation. Briggs's world had not ended with a shout, but with a slow, steady erasure. Jonathan's world, by contrast, carried no marble and no cameras, only folding chairs, wooden floors, and small gatherings. Yet in those rooms, life surged. Narration paints him in modest spaces, cramped church basements, school gymnasiums, community halls filled with people of every shade, every background. His words were fewer than Briggs, but carried weight. In one gathering, a child raised her hand, her voice small but certain. Is he really coming? Jonathan bent down, eyes soft, a quiet smile curving across his tired face. Yes. And that's why we love now. The reply, simple and steady, traveled through the room like a breath of release. Dialogue snippets rose in other spaces. An elder saying softly, "I thought no one saw us, but he did." Or a teenager whispering, "I believe for the first time." The community began to shift. Narration showed how segregated pews, once carefully guarded, began to blend without announcement. Families who never prayed in the same room now stood shoulder to shoulder at vigils. Testimonies spread online, not polished productions, but phone recordings of ordinary voices recounting extraordinary awakenings. One video showed a young man confessing, "I stayed quiet when Briggs called us less than faithful. I won't stay quiet again." Another captured a woman admitting, "I thought church was for them, not us. But I see now he was always here." These fragile confessions carried further than Briggs' empire ever reached, passed hand to hand, phone to phone, until their collective echo drowned out years of silence. Meanwhile, Briggs felt the weight of invisibility. He walked streets where neighbors once fawned, now crossing to the other side, their eyes sliding past him as though he had already ceased to exist. Cashiers handed him change without recognition, his voice no longer commanding privilege, but dissolving into background noise. He became a man who had preached to millions but could not make one soul look him in the eye. Jonathan, untouched by the politics of power, continued moving from place to place, his presence small but steady. At one candlelit vigil in a park, the night air thick with quiet anticipation, he looked over the crowd. Hundreds held flames that flickered against the dark, their silence more eloquent than any speech. Narration slowed as Jonathan's voice rose not in volume but in stillness, the kind that felt eternal. "Silence can be holy," he said softly, the words hanging like incense. "Sometimes it's not the sound of defeat. Sometimes it's the echo of truth that cannot be mocked." Faces glowed in candlelight, eyes reflecting something larger than themselves. Then came the line that settled into the marrow of everyone present, a final thunder spoken without raising his voice. Jonathan's gaze lifted toward the stars as though seeing beyond them. "And when he comes," he whispered, every syllable deliberate, "no one will be able to laugh." The crowd remained still, but the silence that followed roared louder than Briggs's lifetime of sermons, a silence that marked both the collapse of false power and the birth of something enduring.